Thanks for joining us. I'm Megan Roberts. We begin in the Yukon tonight, where the trial has begun for a Faro man who's accused of shooting and killing 2 people and firing at several others 3 years ago. In an unusual turn, Ralph Bernard Shaw admits to killing 2 people and firing shots at 4 others, but he's not entered any pleas yet. Jackie Hong has our top story tonight.
Appeared disoriented as he entered the courtroom. He attended the rest of the proceedings by video call from the Whitehorse jail. The 64-year-old faces 10 charges related to a shooting spree on October 26, 2021. Sangduin Honchayapum and Patrick McCracken were killed. Another man was seriously injured. Honchayapum was Shaw's estranged wife. In an admissions of fact document filed to the court in the early afternoon, Shaw admits to fatally shooting Honchayapum and McCracken. He also admits to firing a gun at 4 other people and injuring one of them. The document makes no admissions about Shaw's motive or intent. The Crown and defense asked for the trial to be adjourned after the filing, stating that they were working on a second admissions document. They did not disclose the content of that document. The trial resumes next Monday. Jackie Hong, CBC News, Whitehorse.
The search for a missing teen in Pond Inlet, Nunavut has been called off. 15-year-old Rico Akpaliapik was last seen on October 2nd. RCMP say he was reported missing 2 days later. Multiple agencies searched for the teen by air, land, and sea. They brought in aerial drones, as well as a police dog unit from Quebec. The RCMP has ruled out foul play, and they still want the public to contact officers if they have any information. Northwest Territories taxpayers will pay the consequences of the new Stanton Territorial Hospital for decades to come. That is one of the findings from a damning Auditor General report tabled in the NWT Legislative Assembly today. The new Yellowknife Hospital, which opened in 2019, was the Territory's largest infrastructure project to date. The report says the government made decisions about the new hospital without evidence, which resulted in a project that cost 62% more than it was supposed to. Luke Carroll joins us now live from the Yellowknife newsroom. So Luke, how did a project that was supposed to cost $750 million and save the public money end up costing $1.2 billion?
Yeah, so Megan, that's a question the Auditor General answers in the 45-page report. It looks at how the new Stanton Hospital was built using a public-private partnership, or a P3 model, and how decisions were made about using the old hospital building. One of the major findings was that the NWT's initial project plan was to renovate and expand the old hospital, and that the government didn't actually really look at how much more it would cost to build a new hospital. So, for example, the GNWT is now also paying rent in the old hospital building, which it still owns. This came after the Territory realized it needed more space for healthcare. So part of the conditions of the lease is that the Territory actually needs to do some of the renovations on the building. Now, this was the whole reason the Territory wanted the P3 model, was to transfer those types of redevelopment risks and costs. And this decision will cost $78 million over the 30-year lease. So here's what the Deputy Auditor General had to say about that decision and the NWT Finance Minister's response to it.
All along, the government knew that it needed more space. In 2016, it was leasing its building to the third-party developer. In 2017, it decided to lease it back, to sublease it back. As I mentioned, it became a rent-paying tenant in its own building and committed to making rent payments and other payments for almost 30 years. To me, that's perplexing when you know you already have a space need. You're renting back your own building.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak to why they would necessarily use words like perplexing. As I'm saying, there was a change at key moments in time, and particularly when this opportunity arose. It's 2020, inflation's gone up, and we have the choice between continuing to lease, which is something I have faced questions from some of you about on previous occasions about why we pay for high leases, versus building new. Building new at that point in time was extremely expensive and very volatile.
So another unexpected expense, the government didn't consider the increased property tax, which is $140 million over 30 years. So the report also lists poor monitoring and record keeping to ensure targets and commitments for hiring local and northern businesses were actually met. There were multiple recommendations in the report, and the government has accepted all but one. Now, it's worth noting that the government said they had actually already started putting in a lot of these recommendations before the report came out. Megan?
Okay, thank you, Luke. That is the CBC's Luke Carroll live in Yellowknife tonight. Funding will run out at the end of this fiscal year for the men's unit at the Fort Smith Correctional Complex. Ahead of that, territorial officials met with workers there to discuss options. And those meetings appear to have caused some concern, according to one NWT MLA. Robert Hawkins told the legislature today that he heard from people in the region who thought they were getting layoff notices. He asked territorial officials about the issue. Here's part of that back and forth.
Mr. Speaker, I was getting phone calls, text messages yesterday from people in the South Slave, more particularly in both in Hay River and Fort Smith, regarding the layoff notices given to the Fort Smith Correctional Center staff. And if I remember correctly, 32 employees work there. The Finance Minister did say during Committee of the Whole back in June that they were pausing it with an uncosted plan, unplanned, but they were going to propose something. Mr. Speaker, I emailed the Premier last night for an update. I'm going to ask the Finance Minister, could she explain the initiative, or sorry, the steps they're taking with respect to these layoff notices to these 32 people in Fort Smith? Thank you.
I can say at this point, staff are not being given layoff notices, but we are trying to take a much more proactive approach here. As such, there was an informal initial meeting held in October 25th with some senior members from the Department of Justice, Department of Finance, Human Resources, in order to start to communicate to staff so that when the time it does come, that the funding here is for 1 year, and so if the time is coming up, rather than waiting until formal notices are provided, that staff actually have information in advance, they can have choices, they can ask questions in advance, and that way, when the clock does start to tick on getting a formal notice, people have the opportunity to make choices well in advance and with lots of time ahead of them.
My question really isn't being answered in the sense of, was this just a friendly conversation that we don't know what we're doing, or what type of notice was specifically given to these 32 employees?
Whenever there's a situation where individuals or staff are facing a change in their status, we have what are called the staff retention policy guidelines. We have staff retention policy, and we always make every effort to ensure that any employee who's facing a change in their status of employment has that full benefit. What happens is that under the staff retention policy, a staff member would get a 21-week notice period. That clock starts to run when someone gets their notice. They were not given their notice. Rather than waiting until someone gets their notice, senior members went and met with individuals ahead of the time when that notice would have to be given, so that when they get their notice, they are actually able to make choices about what types of route they may want to take.
Can she make it absolutely crystal clear what the plan is in that facility? Because we left here in June that they would find a plan and support for those employees. Thank you.
Instead of just receiving a notice in the mail, staff went there to personally speak with employees, let them know what the options are going forward, because there is no more funding for that facility at the end of this fiscal year. Thank you.
Staff shortages, hours-long waits, and elders being loaded onto planes using baggage carts. Those were the conditions elders at Avon's Seniors Home faced when Yellowknife evacuated last summer. The details are in an internal report by the company obtained by the CBC. Sarah Kromolowski read that report, and she joins me now with more. So, Sarah, what did the report say?
Well, one of the first things that jumps out is just how unprepared Avon's was for an evacuation. Less than 3 weeks before Yellowknifers got the order to leave, they had no plan. They'd assumed that the Northwest Territories government would take over, and nobody at the territory actually told them otherwise at all until after nearby Becheco evacuated at the end of July. So as you can imagine, this led to a very bumpy evacuation. There were really serious staff shortages at Avon's because so many essential workers left before they actually started evacuating care residents. And the residents were also subjected to some pretty uncomfortable situations during the evacuation. Some residents waited in their wheelchairs for 9 hours in total before they took off, the report says. And the plane that they were on didn't end up arriving in Edmonton until 2:30 in the morning, and some people had to wait after that. On the way back to Yellowknife, Avon still wasn't able to get proper medical equipment to load residents onto planes from either Alberta Health Services or the Northwest Territories governments. So some residents who had mobility issues were loaded onto the planes through a combination of baggage carts and being physically lifted.
What impact did this have on residents, Sarah?
Well, no long-term care residents were injured during the evacuation, but I spoke to an expert who said that some of what happened was definitely a health risk. This is Dr. Samir Sinha. He's a geriatric specialist and an expert on seniors and emergencies.
I can tell you, you won't find a luggage cart in a hospital. You won't find it in a care home. It's just not, kind of something that we would use to transport someone safely.
Sinha says that Avons did get some things right. They had a plan for where to go and how to get there, and they had go bags for residents that contained important medications and medical histories. But he thinks a lot of what went wrong could have been prevented if there had been more planning in advance from both Avons and governments.
So have there been any changes then that have happened since this report and the evacuation?
Yeah, so I had a pretty long conversation with Daryl Delaney, who's the Avons CEO. He says that Avons has really improved its emergency plan since then, and they feel they're a lot more prepared for an evacuation. But he also insisted that nothing that happened last year was unsafe.
At no time were our residents ever in a precarious situation. Maybe in an uncomfortable wait time, yes, but always cared for, medication there, food, personal hygiene, bathroom breaks, all that kind of stuff were paramount.
He also says that Avons should have gotten more support from the Northwest Territories government, especially when it came to transportation and finding beds in Alberta. I also spoke to Jay Boast, who is the information officer for the Northwest Territories Emergency Management Organization at the time, and I asked him about the Territories' role in the Avons evacuation as well.
I mean, did we learn lessons and could we have done better? I think that is clear, but I think it is in the context of an event that had never happened in history before, and I think that shouldn't be lost in the context of how things unfolded.
Bose says that there should be less confusion about roles during an evacuation now that the Territory has a new emergency plan. And the Northwest Territories Health Authority also told me by email that they will be taking the lead if Avons evacuates again.
Okay, thanks for all your work on this, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
A Yellowknife City councillor says she should not have asked the city to pay for a laptop she lost. At a city council meeting last night, Councillor Kat McGurk said she accepts the findings of the city's integrity commissioner that she acted inappropriately to avoid covering the cost of the missing laptop. The CBC's Nadir Hashmi has that story.
During the city's wildfire evacuation in 2023, Kat McGurk borrowed a laptop and used it to help coordinate volunteer efforts during the evacuation. Later, the owner of that laptop filed a complaint, which the city's integrity commissioner, Sheldon Toner, looked into. His report found that when the laptop went missing, McGurk tried to get the city to reimburse the owner. When that didn't work, she asked the city's wildfire contractors to invoice the city instead. For McGurk's ethics violation, Toner recommended the city publicly censoring or removing McGurk from a meeting to denounce her actions. He also stated the overall impression presented by the evidence is that member McGurk felt entitled to City of Yellowknife resources to cover a loss she had personally incurred. At the council meeting yesterday, McGurk said her judgment was clouded by grief and trauma during the wildfire evacuation.
It was never my intent to abuse my role as a councillor, but I neglected to consider that my actions might not match my intention. In short, I'm willing to accept responsibility for this contravention, and I'm deeply sorry to my constituents and fellow council members.
She says later she realized her mistake, but it was too late.
When I understood that I might be crossing a line, I immediately took pause and contacted the Integrity Commissioner. It was, however, too late. I had already acted inappropriately, and the complaint had been filed.
In a statement to CBC, McGurk says she already paid the complainant $750 for the laptop several months ago. Mayor Rebecca Alty and other councillors will review the report at a committee meeting next month. They have 90 days to make a decision on the matter. Nadir Hashmi, CBC News, Yellowknife.
A resident of Norman Wells, NWT, says the fuel price hike in that community is unsustainable and creates an extremely stressful situation. Home heating fuel prices in the Sawtooth community have soared recently. Suzanne Hall says her monthly income will no longer cover both a tank of fuel and her mortgage. Hall wrote a letter to Norman Wells Mayor Frank Pope and Sawtooth MLA Danny McNeely, saying the community needs help now. She speaks about the toll the situation is having on her and the community.
I truly am sick about this, and I can't get it out of my head. I'm having trouble focusing on anything else, because this is fundamental to everyone's well-being, is having a safe home for the winter. And most of us are feeling really insecure about that right now. I haven't told some of my family in the South what's going on because I don't want them to worry. I really am hoping that this will get worked out. The toll it takes on your mental health it's a lot.
Hall says she'd like to see Imperial Oil be transparent in its fuel pricing, and she wants the NWT government to hold the company accountable.
Hi, I'm Michaela. I'm so happy to have these prosthetic legs. I wear them every day so I can do all the things I love to do. I like to hike, skate, and do gymnastics. Because of your donations, Lamps is able to give me these devices. When you donate, you help kids like me. Thank you.
This is a proposed corridor for multiple pipeline projects.
You're crossing our territory on two ends of your pipeline. Who gave you permission?
Pipelines break of the pipelines would destroy the water and everything in it.
They got to come through us first.
This is an immediate evacuation order for all Coastal GasLink employees. I feel like we are at war. It's just all been building up to this point.
Yenta on The Passionate Eye. Watch free on CBC Gem.
Release him.
Why?
Well, I would say it's extremely bad form to arrest your new boss.
This man is actually in my custody.
What did he do?
Well,
Did you hear that? I'm being charged with,
This ranch isn't going down. Not on my watch.
If the car comes with the deal, I'm in.
Cheers, dragons!
I look forward to fighting you on many a deal.
And we look forward to meeting you.
Dragon's Den. Watch free on CBC Gem.
The question is,
and I'm just going to ask,
I want to ask you, but
why is this such a big deal? What does the science say?
What was their reaction?
What are we talking about here?
Who told you?
So, to be clear, what is the actual story there?
I think we can explain.
Bloc Québécois leader Yves-François Blanchet says he will start talking to the Conservatives and NDP about bringing down the minority Liberal government. This comes after the Liberals failed to meet his demands, adopting 2 private members' bills related to seniors' benefits and supply management. Rafi Boudjikanian has more.
5 weeks after the Bloc Québécois set today as a deadline for the governing Liberals, they insist they mean it.
Have they come to us yesterday or the day before? No, we haven't got what we wanted.
In a letter to the other opposition parties, the Bloc wrote, "We clearly, publicly and repeatedly said this was a final deadline with no possible appeal. From now on, we will vote against the government during confidence motions as long as they are in the interests of Quebec."
If there's a vote tomorrow, they might fall tomorrow.
The Bloc had 2 requests, that Liberals push forward 2 pieces of legislation, one focused on raising pensions for seniors under the age of 74 and the other exempting supply management from international trade negotiations. But while the Bloc says it started chatting with the other parties, the NDP so far is showing no interest.
To be perfectly honest, it shows to me that the Bloc was unable to get the things that they needed for Canadians and for Quebecers. I'm pretty proud of our team. We've been successful at getting some of those really key pieces of legislation through. We'll continue to try to do that.
The Prime Minister also had thoughts to share.
Over the past number of weeks, I've had some very good conversations with Mr. Blanchette. We agree as a party that we need to work on supporting vulnerable people and doing more for our seniors. It's one of the reasons why we've been so enthusiastic about delivering dental care to so many seniors across the country. And we're going to continue to look for ways to help Canadians through these difficult times and work constructively with everyone in the House.
The Bloc's decision is only one of Trudeau's problems this week. He's also still dealing with some of his own MPs who want to force a vote in caucus for him to resign. And the Conservatives say now that they've got the Bloc on side to topple the Liberals, they will present another confidence motion as soon as possible should the NDP indicate it will play ball too. Rafi Bujikani on CBC News, Ottawa.
Canada's special interlocutor on unmarked graves issued her final report today. It calls on Ottawa to establish an Indigenous-led commission to investigate missing Indigenous children. Kimberly Murray says the commission should have a 20-year mandate. Sitting behind an empty chair that was meant to honor children who never returned from residential schools, she revealed 3 key findings she's made in the past 2 years.
First, that many of the missing children have in fact been disappeared by the state. Second, that there is an urgent need to establish a commission of investigations into the enforced disappearance of Indigenous children in Canada. And third, there is settler amnesty in Canada and a culture of impunity.
More than 150,000 Indigenous children were forced to attend residential schools, and at least 6,000 of them died in those institutions. A record number of Nunavut Inuit are set to finish a corrections training program. The Corrections Kauimalaktut training program is a 7-week course. It provides training on how to start a career in corrections as well as cultural training. 14 of the 24 participants in the current cohort are Inuit. Nunavut Justice Minister David Akiaguk says that'll help reduce pressure on jail staff. The program was launched in 2021 after a report from the Auditor General of Canada, which was a follow-up on a previous report from 2015. The 2021 report found unresolved issues, including access to rehabilitation programs, staff training, and safety of both staff and inmates. Some people in Iqaluit say the community's schools need improvements. They shared their concerns at recent community consultations put on by the government of Nunavut. Consultations took place for 3 schools in Iqaluit: Nakashuk, Jomi, and Nanook. The Nakashuk school was built more than 50 years ago, and community members say it needs more windows. A senior facility planner with the government of Nunavut says the windows are small and like portholes and that little light comes into the building.
There isn't very many windows in that school at all. So windows, natural light, connectivity to the land, that sort of thing was of major importance.
The same concern over windows was also brought up for Nanook and Jomi's school as well. Another major concern for Jomi is that it's running out of space for students.
They have been flirting with max capacity for years. So the issue with that school was space. They're sort of splitting at the seams.
All of the information gathered from the consultations will be put into a report that will go to the Nunavut Department of Education. Climb Yukon is building excitement for a new climbing gym. The grand opening of the new climbing gym in Whitehorse is still a year away. The 3,000 square foot space is being built to Canada Games standards. It's currently under construction in the Whitehorse neighborhood of Whistlebend.
The bouldering walls, they're about 4.5 meters high, and the upper mezzanine level is a long length. Maybe it's maybe about 50 feet long, and there's just a bunch of different angles, holds, and volumes, which refer to other projections on the wall. And for those who have climbed at our Porter Creek facility, this is going to be a huge improvement, both in just the level of the climbing opportunities there, as well as a lot more space. So, yeah.
Right.
This will allow Climb Yukon to move out of a local high school gym. The new facility will share space with a local gymnastics team. The cost of the building is around $33 million. A new wood bison management plan aims to look beyond the numbers to shape harvesting guidelines in the Yukon. Since 2012, the policy has been to maintain the population at around 1,000. New harvesting guidelines suggest gathering more information about a herd before setting hunting limits, such as the number of births and deaths over the preceding year, and drawing on information from First Nations land guardians.
Going back to the whole co-management concept, the local First Nations that are involved and the Renewable Resource Councils, they are out on the land, they're seeing what's happening with the bison herd. And, I think that when we're managing them in this new plan, how we're managing them is not from like a top-down effect, but from a bottom-up. So,
The management plan was developed in partnership with a number of Yukon First Nations and researchers, as well as the federal and territorial governments. Now, let's take a look at the weather. Before we go, check out this cute little guy. Photos and videos of this short-haired fox have been circulating on Yellowknife social media. Now, next to another fox, you can see it's much smaller, appears to have way bigger ears, and curlier fur. A wildlife biologist with the NWT government says it's possible the animal could have a genetic mutation, but he says the mutation is pretty rare and calls this little guy definitely a curious case. Definitely a cutie, though. That is Northbeat for tonight. For news anytime, go to cbc.ca/north. Thank you for watching. I'm Megan Roberts. Have a good night.
Which insects are serially monogamous?
I'm just curious.
Can love help us live longer?
I feel alive.
Does heartbreak make music better?
I love this music.
Could AI compose the next masterpiece of our time?
Robot composers conducting robot music.
Do you really need to wait 30 minutes after eating before swimming? And why is something as big as time kept in something as small as a watch?
Oh, that's heavy.
When you get curious, you get CBC.
They're making more money than they have ever made in the history of the music business.
We have generation after generation of us not seeing a fair piece of the pie.
How do we keep the money from Black music in Black people's hands?
You're going to be introduced to a new world. Stand back.
heart is pounding.
This is very hard to do.
We both know it's not an easy task.
The Great Canadian Baking Show. Watch free on CBC Gem. Q with Tom Power. Available now on CBC Listen or wherever you get your podcasts.